You're trying to raise your children right. You've got principles, you've learned a lot of ideas, and you're trying to guide your children by teaching them how to follow instructions or correcting them. You've got a plan, you're working the plan, but sometimes grandparents don't understand the plan or have different ideas about how parenting should take place. And so it creates some conflict. And so I'd like to address that just a moment because it is true that grandparents often do it differently. And some grandparents are very sensitive and they want to support the parents in the ways that they're doing things. So they want to learn and they want to grow. So sometimes we just have to train the grandparents and by explaining the why we're doing certain things. Let me tell you why we're teaching this boy how to follow instructions or why we're giving him more work to do. Because we're trying to build some character inside of him. We're trying to say no to him more often. So when he asks you for things, sometimes it's good to say no because we're building into him a contentment instead of always wanting more in his life. So we look for ways to explain what we're doing to grandparents. And as we do that, then sometimes grandparents come on board. So let's do everything we can to help them understand what we're doing. But sometimes they still disagree. Or sometimes they still have practices that we don't like. Sometimes grandparents are accused of indulging their grandchildren. That is giving them things or making them happy, which parents might feel like that's not the best. My kid needs not to have more stuff. He needs to learn how to be content with what he has. And so we have to work with that. But let me just suggest that grandparents are very valuable. Grandparents offer so many things. Sometimes they offer time, energy, even money to support your family. Sometimes they can step in and be the parent when you need some extra hands. Sometimes grandparents are the ones who are building a special relationship with their grandchildren, and kids need that. The intergenerational relationships that kids have help them have this sense of identity. Where am I from? What am I doing? Those kinds of things are very good. Often grandparents have the ability to step in and communicate to kids some very important things that they need to understand about life and say, hey, look, you really need to listen to your mom or listen to your dad. Grandparents have this spiritual heritage, if they're believers, that they can help pass on to the grandchildren and understand. I think that's what God is talking about in Psalm 78, verses 5-7. Let me read that to you. It says this: He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach their children. So the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands. Ideally, grandparents are going to be in the family and they're reinforcing what you're doing and helping your kids to grasp some spiritual identity, spiritual truths in their lives. And so if we can embrace that, that would be great. But remember this, grandparents do it differently. And when they do, sometimes we have to allow them to do what they do because of all the benefits we gain from the grandparents. And so we're trying to equip the grandparents with as much theory and philosophy of our parenting as possible. But at the same time, we recognize that grandparents have something very powerful that they can offer their grandchildren. There's a heritage there that our grandchildren need to hear. And there's wisdom often that grandparents have. Grandparents often know their kids and their grandkids really well, and they have insight from life experience that they can pass on. So we want to take advantage of the good things that our grandparents offer, try to train them, so to speak, to fit into our goals and plans for our children. And sometimes we have to tolerate some of the things grandparents do because they do it differently. And so we allow that to take place because we want so many of the benefits that grandparents have to offer.